What's happening, Hardscapers? This is episode 131 of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk to you about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. And today we're joined by Scott Oldfield. He is the Vice President, CEO of Tri-Shield Consulting, a team of retired police commercial vehicle inspectors that are committed to road safety and provide a range of services, including commercial vehicle training, among many others. This is our longest one-person interview episode ever, and it is a good one full of amazing information on road safety. It's all about circle checks, equipment loading, and everything you'd want to know about being on the road in your business. Though this episode is quite specific to Ontario, including CVORs, yellow stickers, and license classes, there's about 75% of this interview that can be applied throughout North America, with minor differences that you can look into for yourself, for your region. But it's a great episode to listen to about road safety and to come back to take notes, or have your crew members listen in and take notes as well. There are lots of links that are discussed, especially at the end of the episode, and these are mostly specific to Ontario business owners, so you can find all these links in the show notes of this episode. If you click on the show in your podcast app, you'll find all those links there, and make sure that you go check out Tri-Shield Consulting on their website or at Landscape Ontario Congress this year at booth 129. Thanks, Scott, for giving the time to do this. This was a significant amount of time invested into giving away this information. So be sure, if you're going to Landscape Ontario Congress, you go check them out at 129 and say, thank you, I listened to you on the How to Hardscape podcast. Thank you so much for that information. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Today, we're joined by Scott Oldfield. He is the Vice President and COO of Tri-Shield Consulting, a team of retired police commercial vehicle inspectors that are committed to road safety and provide a range of services, including commercial vehicle training in Ontario, Canada. Scott, thank you so much for joining me here.
Thanks very much for having me on, Mike.
Scott, let's get started to know a little bit more about yourself, just to set some context for our audience. Let's get to know about you and what led to essentially Tri-Shield Consulting, how that kind of evolved and developed.
Sure. Well, Mike, to begin with myself, I'm a retired police officer. I was with the Halton Regional Police, which is Oakville, Burlington, Georgetown, Halton Hills, and Milton. And I was an officer for 33 years. I started way back in 1987, which was quite a while ago. And during my career, I've been lucky. I've had quite a wide variety of units that I got to serve in. But I always primarily had an interest in traffic enforcement and education. As we can probably see, I started to get a real interest in that as just driving to and from work every day, just the way seeing things on the road and people were operating. So the majority of my career was spent in our traffic marine unit. And then my last 9 years was actually spent in our commercial motor vehicle unit. So I was trained, same training as the MTO officers have. They're our lead agency in the province of Ontario. And I went and I took that training. I became certified as an inspector, a commercial motor vehicle inspector. And so I was authorized and allowed to check commercial motor vehicles the same way that the M2 officers do, only I was doing it in the region of Halton. And there would be the odd time that we would go out and help neighboring agencies such as the Toronto Police, Peel, Guelph Police, and Waterloo and York Regional Police. So during that time, it became pretty evident to myself that there's a bit of a lack of getting the information out to, I guess in this case, especially the contractors that are out there, not quite realizing they were trucking companies. When you think about that, they're great at what they do in the training, such as the hardscaping work and the landscaping, but they fall short on the trucking end of it because, one, they don't realize they're a trucking company, and two, just trying to find that information. So I was having this discussion with one of my partners now who I was working with, actually both of them, Pat Martin and Al Stenton, who are both retired officers with Halton as well. And it was funny, the idea of starting Tri-Shield just sort of came up in a coffee shop when we were working one day, and we had about a year left to retirement. And we just said, you know what, there's a need to get that information out there. We did try, and we did actually run classes when we were officers for our contractors within the region of Halton. But that hasn't carried on, just obviously due to budget restraints that the police departments now have. So what we did is we decided we would start our company, and between the three of us, we're all retired police officers. We have 94 years of frontline patrol and traffic experience, with 33 years between the three of us actually being involved in dealing with commercial motor vehicles. All three of us were certified inspectors. In addition to that, through that 94 years we had collectively, 56 of those years we were all certified as level 2 at scene traffic investigators, which means so we were the next step up from what you would see your normal patrol officer would have. Like we'd be able to figure out more, speed, time, distance, those calculations, but more was to help to know what evidence that our main traffic or level 4 traffic investigators would need in order to help them carry on with their investigations. But the big part is we were all concerned, or not concerned, but really believed in traffic safety. My other two partners, Pat Martin and Al Stennett, actually started the Ontario Police Commercial Motor Vehicle Committee. And what that was is they, along with other members of the GTA and the whole province, brought officers together so we could learn what problems we're having in different jurisdictions and what we could do to help each other out, such as Mike, you're probably familiar with some of the bigger safety initiatives or blitzes that have been held in the past, such as at Canada's Wonderland. We used to hold one at the Mohawk Raceway. During that, it would be a 2-day event. We would actually inspect up to 500 vehicles in 2 days. And the only way we could do that was through this committee by bringing in our partners from the MTO and the different police agencies and plus officers in order to get through and check these vehicles. And the reason we wanted to do that was to get a proper snapshot of what is the safety real rating out like. You've probably read in the papers before, police did a little safety blitz and 80% failure. Well, that's because they had limited resources and they were looking for the worst of the worst. In this case, when you're pulling everyone in to check on the safety, we found we were at about 22 to maybe 30% violation rates. And a lot of those would have been easily rectified if there was proper training out there for different companies. And especially when I look at it, especially the company where, what we're talking about today, this sector, is just for that information so they could understand what they needed to do in order to comply with different regulations and primarily load security regulations out there, the way they're taking their loads on the road and strapping them and weight restrictions. But the big thing is when I guess we do talk, like we've been now active for a year and a half. When we're running classes, we sit up there and we say, it's great. Yes, we're 3 retired police officers, but there's a lot of retired police officers in the province. So what else besides this puts us above to actually, be prepared to talk to you today about road safety or what are your requirements? So the big thing is that we really did start to excel in our field. And the 3 of us were actually certified to go across the province, which we did, to teach frontline officers the commercial motor vehicle course. So it's a 3-day course to teach frontline officers what to be looking for. But not only that, we also went to the Ontario Police College and we actually taught the commercial motor vehicle component of the traffic officers course. So again, we were hitting officers all across the province that would be taking this course. So try and make sure that everybody's on the same page. I don't know, Mike, if you've ever looked at the Highway Traffic Act. It's a very thick book. If you ever want to be able to have trouble sleeping, I would suggest you start reading it. You won't get past 3 pages. But again, this is a service we provide. We have read it, especially as it contains to the Highway Traffic Act, to commercial vehicles, and where people fit in. And this is the information that we like to provide. And the other reason we got going with this is that we found we were always getting talked, and I think you and I talked before we started the interview about people sort of saying, well, Scott, how does this work? It's kind of a gray area. Seems to be a term we heard a lot, and it's not. If you actually read the Highway Traffic Act, it's right in there, or it's black and white. It's written down what you must do to comply. Where the problem was coming up was different officers, and it was how they wished not to maybe interpret the act so much, but what they felt was more worthy that they wanted to, not that they wanted to, but that they were going to enforce. And this is the area. So when we run our courses, we actually teach it, and we found we've got a great response. This is the way it is. Maybe not the way that I might have given you, say, a citation or a ticket or placed you out of service for this. It might have been something that I might have said, you know what, you're missing a couple of straps, in the sense of, let's say we've done a cleanup, we've got the leaves in the back of the truck, and maybe the tarp's kind of flopping. You know what, you've done your best, but put a couple of straps on, we'll keep it in, and you're good to go. But Officer B might say, no, the way the act reads is you must do this. So that's the way we teach it. And we found from the company owners, they really appreciate that because, once you know what you need, you will think they're complying. And especially the people that are getting a hold of us. And these are the good companies. And again, that's why we wanted to get that out there. And the other thing we saw is you just do not want to get your information out of Facebook. Facebook has got to be one of the worst platforms out there for people giving their own take on what they believe. So as we said, and even a little side note, you should also never put stuff on Facebook because the police are actually on Facebook. And I remember one gentleman that I had dealt with, and he passed. Lovely gentleman to deal with, and I sent him on his way. And of course, I looked on Facebook. I was just curious a day later, and there's this thing with this stop. And apparently, I was the biggest idiot going. And I thought we got along quite well. But the problem is his name was right there. So, that information kind of gets out. You don't really want that out there. So, but as I said, the main thing with our company is just with experience. I guess the last thing I didn't really touch on is we were also recognized, the three of us, we received the Award of Excellence in Traffic Safety from the Ontario Association's Chief of Police, our unit, when we were all together. And of course, that's what we thought. We'd take this knowledge base. We have it. And we thought it'd be great to get it out there and be able to help the industry.
A couple of things you mentioned there. Facebook is an interesting place, and the internet is an interesting place. And we live in a time where information has become from accessible to there's an overwhelming amount of information, and you have to be able to kind of go through that information in order to understand what is applicable to you and to get through that misinformation to be able to apply it in your business. I like that you kind of brought that up, and to, being able to understand where you're getting your information from is so important. And you also mentioned budget restraints in being able to send officers to be able to do these, in-person seminars or information sessions. I know I started in the industry back in 2007 for a supplier. And before then, we actually had MTO and officers out at our location to be able to hold a contractor seminar. And by the time I'd entered the industry, that was all over and done with because of budget restraints. And I'm sure in years to come, those budget restraints are going to be getting more restrictive, which is, I think, a great place for somebody like Tri-Shield Consulting to come in and to fill that void in the industry for sure.
Yeah. And as I said, and we found it's been very receptive. Our client base is, Mike, we've gone all over. We've actually been from Ottawa out to Chatham and over to London, and plus obviously in the GTA. So we're finding that our services are being appreciative, and we're also finding people that are finding us, through, our website going, well, we just didn't realize we're a company out there like yourselves. And there really, really are few and far between. I know of one other company that's out there that are great consultants, a couple of retired MTO officers that do this as well. But they tend to focus more on the companies that are, the bigger trucking companies that are going cross-border. So, yeah, there's not a lot of us out there. And again, it's all to be on the same page, too, and we're presenting the same information.
And you also mentioned that we're not just hardscapers. We're not just in the trades. We're also a trunking company, which is important to wrap your head around so that you're acknowledging the Highway Traffic Act and being, I don't know what the word for it is, but adhering to that. In my own business, I limit that liability as much as possible. I don't want my guys on the road going to get materials. I do deliveries. Not that means that I don't have to, be safe when on the road. It's just I'm trying to limit that liability as much as possible in my business. I do deliveries as much as possible, just for guys listening in on this right now. But you also mentioned it depends on the officer in the traffic stop. And I just want to pick your brain on this a little bit. It depends on the officer in what in that moment he's going to try to enforce. Is that based on the officer's education and what maybe they grasped in that education and want to apply that on the road? Or is that based on any given time period? Officers are told that they need to look for this on the road. Is this like ongoing education, or is this kind of something that the officer grasps, they understand, and they're able to apply it on the road and look for those things? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so I think you've pretty much hit the nail on the head. So I think one, it's with the officers, as I talked about it earlier. The Highway Traffic Act is such a big piece of legislation, and obviously the regulations that deal with commercial vehicles. So when we do get, and these officers have been through the police college, and I mean they've been there for 15 weeks, and it's and on road training, and I mean even still at times it's tough. There's a whole bunch to grasp, and such as like when we talk about, and we'll talk about a little later, annual safety stickers or the PMCVIs that are on our vehicles, like when you need them and when you don't. So like that might be something that they're focused in on. Some officers are very big on for different reasons. So myself, when I was working, I was very big on no stopping signs and no parking signs, especially with commercial vehicles. And why was I that way? Maybe more than Officer B might be, was because I investigated a fatality where a larger truck had actually parked in front of a stop sign because they wanted to go in for coffee. And this mall had actually provided parking for trucks, but this driver didn't want to go in because I'd have to go around and out to come back on the roadway as opposed to just heading straight. Well, the location that they picked to go in for their coffee, there's a hill. They parked right in front of the driveway. And this vehicle pulled out and got hit by another truck right on the driver's door. And unfortunately, the driver was dead or had fatality. So once you sort of go to something like that, you go, I've got a reason now, especially why I'm going to maybe enforce that, which some people might go, well, why are you doing this? And that's just as an example. We have other officers that under the Dangerous Goods Act, I mean, they believe that, if you're leaking fuel and or you're not properly secured, that it could leak on the road and cause issues, and it could be because of their experience, or as you said, what they understand. They may charge you for it, or in the sense of when you look at dangerous goods, when I talk about it, once you lose your exemption for carrying dangerous goods, then there's different legislations you have to apply for, and sometimes you could end up for 3 tickets for just not having, say, a dangerous goods properly strapped down.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you for answering that. It clarifies that in my own mind. Now, dealing with contractors, what are some common questions that contractors may ask you about road safety? What are some common themes that present themselves to you as you have been both an officer and now as a consulting agency?
Well, when we get dealing with them about road safety, the big part is more, what do I have to do to comply? Like, so in the sense of like, when do I require a CVOR, which is your commercial vehicle operator's registration number? And if you talk about how things change, back when I started in 1987, a lot of people, you could just apply on, go in, apply, and you just got it. And now you have to do a test. So people are wondering, do I need this? And when do I need this? So, I mean, and this is where it gets to be a little more confusing. So, to begin with, when do we need a CVOR? Like we're telling the operator, it's if you've got a truck or a commercial motor vehicle and how it fits under your different definitions. And if it's registered for over 4,500 kilograms, so let's say 4,501 and up, or actually weighs. And this is the other thing at times where people don't quite realize that, yes, you can register your truck for anything you want in the province, but then we still actually look at what it actually weighs. So, for instance, the police in Halton Region, they have 20 portable scales out there, and that's just the police, not counting the MTO. And again, all the police agencies in the GTA have portable scales, which they place out in front of a vehicle and weigh it. And if your truck's found to be, so let's say you've registered for 4,000 and it's found to, weigh, 5,000, well, you're now 1,000 kilograms or 1 ton over your registered weight, but you now actually require a CVOR. And the reason that's in there is to make sure that people, if you're going to be carrying that type of weight, actually get it. And if you're unfamiliar, Mike, I'm sure you are familiar about a CVOR, but it's the Ministry of Transport's way of actually tracking a company. Let's say it's kind of like the company's driver's license. If you get too many tickets towards it or demerit points, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, I think maybe we need to come and have an audit and have a chat and just see, what do you have on files? Like, are you keeping up to what your requirements are? So that's the big one we have with that. And then the other question we now get nowadays is, how do I get a CVOR? So for people that aren't familiar, you get on the Ministry of Transportation's website and you can actually fill out the CVOR form online and you submit it. And then what happens is you'll receive a date and the location to attend and do a written test. Now, Mike, I'm not sure when you got your CVOR, but now they recommend you read this book, and the book's got like 380 pages, and you have to go through this, which is a little more difficult especially if you're, let's say, in the landscaping industry and you're now reading stuff that really applies to cross-border truckers. But we have to know this because at the end of the day, it's a 30-question test that we do, but it's a random 30 questions. So it's picked out of a pool. So we don't know what you would get for questions, and you have to get at least 80% on that test to pass. We realized this was an issue, and we developed a course to help people prep for the CVOR test. And we've run it twice now, and actually we had great success with both gentlemen getting through it. But they said it was quite onerous actually out there going into the MCO and getting this, and with actually having had the training, they said they never would have made it. So that's the big thing with that. And then a lot of other questions we start getting, and this would really apply to the clientele, for the people that are in the landscape industry that use their truck for their own use on weekends, because you can't have a company truck in your own truck. It's sort of one and the same. So they always want to know if they have to fill out their daily vehicle inspection forms. They've complied. They go, I know I got to have my truck. I've got to have it registered because I haul, let's say, a skid steer or what I'm hauling in the back on a trailer. I know I have to be registered for 7,000 kilograms, but I now have this. But do I have to fill this out, or does my wife have to fill it out, say on a Saturday if she's taking the kids to, say, hopefully to hockey practice, soccer, baseball, what have you? And there is actually an exemption in there, which not a lot of people realize, but no, you don't. But you have to meet these requirements. And one of them being, you have to look in the door of your truck at the manufacturer's gross vehicle weight rating. So we have to make sure that's under 6,500 kilograms. So I normally equate that if you're operating, say, a Ford, if you're an F350 and below, you're going to be fine. If you've got the F450 or above, you're going to still be filling them out. And the other thing is, it has to be a pickup truck as it was designed. So it's still got the proper box on it. It can't be modified or you made it a flat deck because, let's say, you're hauling gooseneck trailers or that type of stuff. And the other one that comes into play, though, is you can't have any tools of the trade in the vehicle. So where this would be tough is for the gentlemen that are plowing snow, because in the winter, you're going to have the salter on the back. So my suggestion would be just better safe than sorry. And if you got the salter on the back, you want to make sure it's properly secured in, especially if you're just using the strapping system to keep it in. You should be doing it every day. But so those are questions that we would find. We get a lot about road safety. And I guess the big thing about road safety we're going to talk to this whole interview, Mike, is proper daily vehicle inspections. I mean, that is where we found a lot of people fall short because, one, they don't understand the importance of it, and then they don't understand what they're supposed to do with it, and they don't understand when they're supposed to do it. And this is the thing we point out, is that you must do it every 24 hours. So that the vehicle is going out. And now we're talking when the vehicle's working. So let's say I have a company and I have 6 trucks and they are just used for my business. I've got to make sure that they're done, which sometimes can get a little onerous because I've got to make sure my employees are doing it. And I know we went and ran a class for one company, and the owner came up to us after and thanked us and said, well, Scott, I didn't know about daily vehicle inspections. He said, I have one guy who's worked for years. He's great at what he does, but he's been plowing snow all winter and he's given me 2 daily vehicle inspections because his thought, this person believed that if I don't have a trailer on the back, I don't have to do one. And that's not it. Even if it's just a straight, let's say, F-150 pickup, and you've registered it for, let's say, 6,000 kilograms because you might, be hauling a trailer and we got to compensate for that weight. When I'm working in that truck has to actually have it done. And the other thing is, some people think is that, I've got my truck, I've done my daily vehicle inspection, I'm good to go. There's still an onus on me to be checking the truck during the working day. And I'll bring this out as a couple of examples. Things break. If we're dealing in the construction industry, we're in some really bad areas, rough areas. And can something be fine in the morning and then halfway through the afternoon break? Absolutely. My nephew used to have his own landscaping business, and he actually took a picture. He made sure his guys, after, because I was his uncle, were checking the vehicle daily and keeping up on it. And on his trailer, one of the springs had busted, and it was fine in the morning. But he showed me the area it was in. It was pretty rough, but fortunately, the guy went around and caught it. So, just an example there. We have to just keep up on it. Much like when we see the big rigs, especially hauling steel on the highways, you'll hear them use a term of recheck, and they will get out and they will recheck their chains to make sure that they haven't slackened during the journey. We kind of have to make sure we're doing the same thing. And it's like we talked about earlier, we have to realize we're a trucking company and we have to keep up on this. And I guess another thing that we get, another big question we get when we start talking about being basically a trucking company, we get asked a lot, do I have to pull into the truck inspection station? So we'll say in the QEW in Oakville, if the lights are flashing. And the answer is yes, which really surprises a lot of people. But we have to pull in, but this is what it depends on. Is our truck registered for over 4,500 kilograms? So if I'm operating on, I've got an F-250, let's say, and I'm going down the highway and it says Scott's Trucking or Scott's Landscaping, or let's pick something a little better, one of the landscape mini dumps, I call them, the F-550s, and the lights are on, I have to pull in. Now, I'm probably going to get shipped through pretty quick because you'll pull in the lane and they'll look at you and they'll send you on your way, unless they notice there's a defect on the vehicle. And then I'm going to the back and I get to sit with the other people in the parking lot of shame. But I have to do that because if I don't, and I carry on past the lights and there happens to be an MTO officer in a cruiser, or you have a police officer, whether it be the OPP or a municipal police officer behind you, and they pull you over, they have the authority to do a couple of things. One, they can take you back to the weigh station and have you inspected, and they can issue a $490 ticket, and that ticket is for failing to submit your vehicle for testing, and it's 5 CVOR points. So that's a big one that then shows up on your record that the ministry might start looking at. And there is no defense for it because, again, it's right there. It's as plain as day. When you read the Traffic Act, you must submit your vehicle when those lights are on. But a lot of it, when we talk about, do we think of ourselves as a trucking company? And usually a lot of it is the people aren't trying to, get away with something. They just don't realize that they're required to go in. And I should also say, though, Mike, the other thing is we don't want anybody doing a Hail Mary. You're in the middle lane, you see the lights on and whipping over. If you cannot safely get over, that's acceptable, right? You can carry on. But if you're in that lane and you can get safely over, you are expected to go in. And then just the other thing we get on, and we talked about it briefly, was the load security. We get a lot of questions about that, whether it's during the winter, during the summer. I've got sod on my vehicle, I've got a skid steer or a piece of equipment on my vehicle, what's required. And people talk about damaged straps, and that's a huge thing in this industry, especially, is straps get damaged. Just the equipment's sharp and we have to keep up on it. And usually it's not the owner that's the issue, it's the employees. One, either not checking or not wanting to tell the boss because they're afraid they're going to get into trouble. And this is the big thing we get out there going, the boss would much rather provide you with a $30 strap as opposed to getting a $390 ticket for not being properly secured. And this is the way we sort of tell it. And when we're talking with doing our training, pretty effective when you've got 3 officers that have done it. We tell war stories about what we found out there. And yes, there are people we came across who were trying to cheat the system, and then there are other people that just honestly didn't know. And it was pretty easy to tell when you were dealing with who you were dealing with. And the last thing we talked about was the annual safety stickers. We get a lot of people with some confusion. When do I need an annual safety inspection sticker? Or it's actually called a PMCVI, periodical mechanical commercial inspection. When do I need that? And it's a 3-step process. So we would explain it to people, and hopefully let me know if I get this across, if you think we've got nailed it. But the first one is, if the magic number we're always going to deal with when I need these is 4,500 kilograms. So anything over 4,500 kilograms, so let's say 4,501, is going to require one under 3 different steps. The first one is it registered over 4,500 kilograms? So that's pretty straightforward. If it is, we've got to have it. The next one is, does the vehicle actually weigh over 4,500 kilograms? So now this sort of comes into play with the people that are, say, trying to go, I don't want a CVOR. I kind of don't want to be dealing with this stuff. I don't understand it. But let's say they get a load of sod loaded on their truck and they go through, or they're going to the dump, and then it gets weighed and it weighs over 4,500 kilograms. And yes, you do require an annual safety on your vehicle. And the last one, and this is where people get a little bit confused at times, is the manufacturer's gross vehicle weight rating. So we look at that. That's on the inside door of your truck. So as an example, let's say my company has a cube van, and I've decided, and rightfully so, I'm not ever going to be carrying over 4,500 kilograms in this van. I have it as a vehicle just to go out to help do certain things, and I've registered it for 4,000 kilograms. And you never weigh over 4,000 kilograms, but we look in the door and it actually says 6,300 kilograms, which is normally what your cube van is going to tell you. I have to have it regardless. So a lot of people get confused. You may need an annual safety, but it doesn't mean you need a CVOR. It's what the vehicle could potentially carry, which is why you would need it. So when we look at our pickup trucks, okay, so let's say that, again, my business, my landscape company, I've got, and we'll just pick on a half-ton pickup truck. If you look inside the door, let's say it says 3,000 kilograms. Well, the next thing I'm going to look at is what's it say on your trailer? So if I go to the trailer and the gross vehicle weight rating, and especially if you're looking at a 2-axle trailers, minimum going to usually be 3175. And I'm talking more of those dump style trailers. So you add those together, we're at 6175 kilograms. So because those two are together, I have to have a sticker on the truck and the trailer. And this sign can become sometimes a bit of an issue because I'm the foreman for a company. And let's say I have the half-ton pickup because I'm just to make sure jobs are done. But all of a sudden, I've got my dump trailer and I know the guys are working at a job site and they need it. And I hook my, the company pickup to it. I will still require that sticker on my truck. So this is where companies are trying to figure out where they fit into this. And so hopefully I've explained that well enough that that's fairly straightforward. And the other thing is it's valid for a year from when you get it. So these are all things that, we'll get asked about. How do I make myself a safer company? And the other thing is training. We always tell drivers, like, especially if we're dealing with a company, where we tell drivers, be selfish. And, they'll look at you and go, I've never been told to be selfish before. My parents always said to, be out there and, take care of each other. Well, the reason we say be selfish is if you worry about your driver's license, it's a benefit to the owner of the company, because you worry about yourself, it's going to take care of the company's vehicles, and we don't have to worry about points being assessed to the CVR as well. And the other thing that people don't realize is that if you are stopped on the highway and you're given a ticket, say for commercial motor vehicles, so, let's say that it's CVR points, but it might not be a demerit point ticket on your own driver's license, that still gets reflected back on your own insurance when actually you go to get your own motor vehicle insurance. Like, they have access to those records. So we get a lot of people, their eyes really kind of open wide when we bring that up. And that's the thing that we need to get at is take your time, because normally, the owners that we deal with, they want their employees to take the time just to make the employees realize. And then I get at times, let's say, especially on the grass cutting crew, you've been cutting lawns, end of a hot day, you just want to get the lawnmowers loaded back on. I don't need to put all those straps on, or it comes in with the jerry cans of fuel. Oh, you know what? I can't be bothered to put the top on it. And, you go down the road, and then the driver is the one that is responsible, as well as the company. So, and, it really gets reflected to them when we explain what could happen.
Definitely. That was excellent information there. And I talked about this just before we started this interview. I just want to pick your brain on this in terms of Service Ontario locations. And Scott, just tell me if you don't want to get into this or not. But when I first started my business, and you mentioned the CVOR test, I failed once or twice that. I could have probably used your training there, because I was a little bit frustrated in terms of studying for that and realizing none of this applies to what I'm going to actually be doing, like a very small amount. Why am I studying for this? That was a little bit frustrating. But the other frustrating thing was going into a Service Ontario location and wanting to be that safe driver on the road, starting my business, and wanting this information because online I just wasn't getting pointed in the right direction. And I just wasn't getting the right information from the Service Ontario location either. Even going to the manager then redirected me to a larger Service Ontario location and said, go ask them. And then going there, and then again going up to a manager and still getting that same response. It kind of seems like people almost want to wash their hands with it and, say, go online. The information is all online. Is this something, I don't know how to ask this question to you, but is this something that you see as a problem that's kind of snowballed up until the present day? Is this something that has to do with these Service Ontario locations needing some sort of education from officers, from MTO? Where's that miscommunication? And have you experienced that, or was that just kind of my own sort of anecdotal story there?
No, unfortunately, I think, Mike, that's quite a common story or that we've heard. So I guess when you deal with Service Ontario, I think the one we have to realize is that a lot of them are not staffed anymore by MTO officers. They're contracted out. So like kind of like a third party. So, they understand certain aspects of it. And then CVOR, they know how to say, go to computer A and do your test, but they don't understand the rules themselves. And in an example, there are sometimes an exemption where we can register our truck over 4,500 kilograms that I don't require a CVOR. Now, this is a personal use. So for myself, if I was hauling my RV trailer, and I'm going to I need to be registered for that weight. I'm not doing it for commercial purposes. I'm not making money out of it. There's an exemption there because my truck fits in that category. But very few of them know that. So you actually, when you go in, you have to be prepared to know where the regulation is. If you just check this regulation, normally see that, then they're good to go. And some Service Ontarios are better than others because there are some, obviously, individuals that are more schooled in it and just more interested. But that is a problem that we've heard that's not unique. And the other thing I know is when you talk about how difficult it was, to study for the test, to figure out to get the right information, there had been some talk about, do we try and look at having different levels of CVOR, and then it comes down to how to enforce it. So for your trucking companies that are, your semi-trailer trucks that are going across into the States, going across the province and going across the country, they need to have what we're doing now. But could we make something a little more specific for the landscape industry? Let's say, and I'm taking the construction industry, that's staying local. And I think what they're trying to get their heads wrapped around right now, or we're trying to get their heads wrapped around, I'm not sure where they are at now, if they're even considering carrying on with that, was just how do you enforce this and how do you make sure that today, Mike, your company is only going to be local, but all of a sudden you decide to get into the transport business and go out and then you're using that CVOR. So there's different ththings there they have to figure out. And as I said, I know from, when we put together a course on how to prep for a CVOR test, it was, it was a bit of an eye opener to see how much information is there and what you could potentially get drawn as a question.
Definitely. Thank you for answering that. And continue on with our questions here. I'm loving this conversation, Scott. I let me know in terms of timing wise if we're coming close to your timing, because we do have quite a few more questions to get through here. But what are common problems that contractors experience when being pulled over? Is there some sort of common theme that you see in a contractor being pulled over that they aren't adhering to?
Yeah, there's, as I said, and I think I talked about this earlier, Mike. I mean, the big thing we're going to talk about is daily vehicle inspections, right? And training. Training is huge. So what we end up looking at when we're dealing, like some of the things that they experience when they pull over. So for one, the big thing is that when they're going down the road, let's say they're on the highway, and I'll ask you this question, Mike, we can interact a little bit. You see the blue and red lights coming on behind you. What's your reaction? What are you going to do besides going, oh, great, I'm getting stopped, or I hope it's the guy next to me? What would you want to do?
In terms of, I see those red and blue lights, immediately get tense. And then, hope it's the guy next to me. And if it's not, then, we're pulling over. And immediately my thought is, no matter what, and I know this from talking to other contractors, that when we get pulled over as a commercial vehicle, it's almost a guarantee that they're going to knock us for something, regardless of how pristine our vehicles are or whatnot. I think the common consensus is we're getting knocked for something.
And I've heard that, and I'll tell you right now, I have stopped a lot of operators that have left with a handshake and a sticker because their vehicles have had no issue. And it also then depends maybe what they're finding. But when I was asking that question about the traffic stop, and that's what it is, if I'm trying to stop you, what I want you to do, or what I want you to do when I was an officer, is I want you to pull to the right. I want you to stop. If I was an ambulance or a fire truck, I think you'd agree with me, like, right? Everybody does that. They pull to the right and stop. Mm-hmm. But you know what they do when it's a police officer? They keep driving straight ahead. Boy, I hope it's not me. I hope it's not me. So that's one issue that we would run into. Now, having said that, when we are, running our classes and we talk about this is one of the courses we actually offer. It's dealing with law enforcement, and it's more to get you to know what to expect during an inspection. But the big thing is that I want you to stop. Now, I also know, like Mike, especially now we talk about the landscape industry, our trailers are getting bigger, our trucks are bigger, and some of the roads we're on are maybe not great roads in the sense of like maybe the shoulder's soft, maybe this isn't where I want to go. And I understood this as an officer, and we actually taught that to the officers that would be taking our classes. Like you got to let the driver sort of dictate part of the spot where they're going to go. So the one thing is let's say you're going, that shoulder looks a little soft. I've got a machine on behind me. Best way to let me know that you've at least seen me is put on your four ways. Because now you're saying, hey, officer, I've seen you. And that already has put you in my good books going, okay, you've now noticed where I am. That's great. The next thing that I want is I do want you to pull over at some point, right? So it may be, and we'll pick, in Halton Region, Dundas Street is a prime example. It's a 4-lane road. Let's say there is no shoulder, there's a curve. Well, pull as far off to the right as you can and stop. And people feel very, vulnerable might be the word about that. But what we have to realize is that vehicle that is stopping you has emergency lighting on it, and that's to direct people off to the side. What we would find happen, or what happened a lot to me, I would have drivers see a side street and they go, oh, there's a side street, I'm going into it, thinking you're helping me out. Well, here's an example that happened to me a few times, but I was stopping a vehicle, and the only reason I was stopping the vehicle is I'd stopped one of the company trucks the week before, and there were issues with the daily vehicle inspection report. One of the local companies I dealt with, and I got to know the safety and compliance officer very well for that company. And I called them up and said, just so you know, I stopped truck number one and they had these issues. Everything else is fine on the truck. So I did not issue any charges. I didn't mark the truck out of service or anything like that. I said, will you deal with it? He says, absolutely. So I saw another truck from that company, and I just wanted to stop them, see, has the officer done what they said they're going to do? And so the driver, trying to be conscientious, pulls into this side street. Well, guess where it was? It was a school zone, and we had school offloading. So I had a lot of parents who weren't very happy with me because I've got this big truck now in there where the trailer stopped, but also the truck couldn't get turned around. So we had to actually back it back out onto the road, which took me another 15 or 20 minutes. And at the end of the day, I just wanted to take a look at the daily vehicle inspection report. And, it was done fine. They'd been taught properly by the officer, the safety officer of the company. I just wanted to make sure that they had followed up on the recommendations I'd asked. So this is why we want you, don't pick, because what happens is I want you to stop on the road if you have to. And I'll tell you where to go if we decide that there's issues with the vehicle that we need to go further look at. And if not, you could be on your way. It's a quick walk around. Like I could walk up to vehicles and I could go within 30 seconds, go, yeah, this is fine, and you're on your way. Because I think as you've seen, Mike, being on the roads, there's a lot of bad equipment out there. And I, as an officer, only had so much time. And that's what I wanted to concentrate my time on. And the other thing, please never, ever pull into a gas station or into a garden center, because usually the owners aren't very happy to see the police there, and because we're blocking the gas pumps and so forth. So that's why we ask, stop on the road. Because that's normally step one, where we go from the traffic stop on. It's normally the first gauge of may you get inspected further or may you not. So that's the one thing that we tend to find the issues. And but the other thing that we tend to find is that when the officers are looking, say, at the daily vehicle inspection report, they may say, do you have your Schedule 1 with you? Are you familiar with Schedule 1, Mike? Yeah. So what that is, for people that don't realize, it's actually, if you're using the books out there, you've got the book and it's right in the book. But the reason we ask, do you have Schedule 1, is because that shows us, does the driver, one, have it and know what it is? Because if you don't, how did you check your vehicle? Because as the regulations, you have to use Schedule 1 to check it. And the other thing we found, Mike, usually with the daily vehicle inspection reports, is there was a lot of form and matter issues. Like one, the driver just wasn't doing it. They weren't putting AM, PM, for example, on the time they did it. They weren't putting down the proper location. A lot of form and matter issues. Or a lot of times, like, you just go back, no defects. And I walk by and all of a sudden you see, well, their safety chains have been worn down to basically a nub and they haven't been there for a while, or the breakaway switch in the trailer obviously has been broken for a few weeks and this isn't getting captured. So those are issues. And loads, as we talked about, loads are a big part of it. Like when we look at those, like they're not being properly secured, either usually with, let's say we've got straps on, but they're damaged, or the chains are worn. And again, on trailers can always have bulging tires. Sidewalls are cut and exposed. And sometimes there's something else. You look at the lug nuts on the wheels, you notice that they're missing or loose, so forth. And the other big thing that we would find when we were doing our testing was that if we're looking at a hydraulic brake truck, that the emergency brake isn't working. And we will talk a little bit later about how to properly test for emergency brake. But that's something that should be done. Well, it's supposed to be done every time that truck is taken on the road, every day when you're doing your daily vehicle inspection. And I would say just because a truck has come back from a dealership, let's say you've gone in for your safety, you should still be checking it. As a little side note, one of our clients, we were there and we were doing our awareness course. And what we do is we deal with that with companies' vehicles. So it's very specific. If you run a certain type of truck and trailer, we tailor make it to that. Truck had just come back from the safety, and we're showing them how to test the emergency brake. The driver put it on, brake went all the way to the floor, and put the truck in drive, and the truck just drove down the road. And so with the owner, we got a hold of the company that had safetied the truck, and they were saying that, actually had a mechanic who had an apprentice, and he thought the apprentice had looked at reconnected the emergency brake, and the apprentice thought the mechanic had done it. And you've got to make sure once you get two people working on something, you got to make sure that it's properly working. So that's just sort of a side note of something we want to look at. And just the last thing, just so people are aware, you talked about earlier, just about your truck can be pristine, and when it's checked, all the trucks are checked the same way, which we'll talk a little bit later about that in the procedure. But it's called CVSA, so that's the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. What that was actually started in 1982, and it was started because a lot of they started realizing trucking is very transient to begin with, especially when we're talking with the bigger trucks. So the idea was we were going to come up with this procedure and out of service criteria, and we're going to do it. And so the idea should be that if you're checked in Ontario, you're going to get checked the same way in Georgia, and that would even go for vehicles in the landscape industry. So not only do we have that, and that was adopted in Canada in 1998, that standard, but we also have our Highway Traffic Act, which sort of goes above and beyond when we're doing what we're looking at. So, we have to be aware of those different things, but that's when an officer is looking at your vehicle. That's what their criteria that they're using. The CVSA, it's quite an important organization. When I was an officer, I actually Pat Martin, who's my one partner, and I both sat on that representing Halton Police for the province of Ontario. And we sat on different working committees. And we found it such a worthwhile organization and very important for road safety that as a company, we've actually now signed up, and we're now members on the industry side, which is a little bit different and kind of unique. So it's neat to sort of see both sides of it, because it brings industry and law enforcement together and to sit down and discuss what should be out of service and what should not. And just a prime example, we were there and one jurisdiction brought up, you've got a trailer, and this is really specific for landscape, Mike. Can I twist the chains? And, we had our officers from down in the States going, you can't do that. That's not right. And we're going, sure you can. It's not compromising the integrity. But what we ended up doing together collectively as a group, we then went and we actually got a hold of people that look at the chains, and they did testing on the chains, and they came up and they went, no, it's not a violation. It does not compromise the integrity of the chain. So this is something, again, for your listeners, Mike, if they have, especially trailers are going different trucks, you need different chain lengths. It's okay for your driver to twist the chains. We just don't want to twist them so tight that when we're turning, we're going to start pulling them and, we're going to start damaging the chain. But you can do that to get them up off the road. So for example, it's just stuff like that. But as I said, the traffic stop is very important at the start. And from that point on, it's just listen to the officer. I think that's the other thing. It's when the officer is giving directions, that's the time to do what you're told. And if you should, have unfortunately get some, say, traffic tickets, you don't hold your, you don't want to hold your trial at roadside, if you know what I mean. It's you take your tickets with good grace, because it doesn't mean it just means you're charged. It says the officer believes you committed this offense, you're not convicted. And what I always told people, Mike, is I said, get this stuff fixed. Come to court. Happy to see you there. And especially in my career, I'd have to say 95% of the people I dealt with were fantastic. And you know what? You come to court and you show me you fixed everything. Along with our prosecutors, I would be the first one to vouch for you. And, we would normally withdraw a majority of the tickets. And now, if you were stopped a second time for the same things, you were maybe not going to get such the same greeting from me. But that's the way that, especially in our region, that we were working towards. And for the most part in the GTA, that's the way it is. Because unfortunately, getting tickets is the only way you can make sure that people fix the problem. But yeah, so as I said, and just you may be interested, but the top 5 equipment violations that we noticed the last year, I was in police in 2019, and I did check. It didn't change for 2020. Braking systems are big issues. Tires and wheels, brake adjustments for the air brake vehicles, cargo securement, and lighting. And I'm sure that probably isn't a surprise to those would be the top 5 issues. And if we can get our operators to be checking out or make sure that their employees are, you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, thanks so much for this information, Scott. That was excellent. Where do you want to take this from here? Do you want to get into talking about circle checks? Do you want to talk about preparing for a start of the season, start of the day, whatever it might be? Because those two kind of blend together, I think. And you've already touched on quite a few notes from each of those.
Yeah, so I'll carry on, and if I'm repeating myself too much, let me know, Mike. But why don't we start the start of the season? I think might sort of be the best thing to look at, because I think it sort of then goes into the daily vehicle inspections, but what help is for. And so the main thing really is we've got to ensure that our employees are properly trained, and especially trained for the equipment they operate on. And, I'll go, like, the one thing I was always impressed with a lot of companies I've dealt with is their employees were trained in how to use the equipment for at the job site, whether it be, how to properly operate these, say, lawnmowers, or if you're more into the hardscaping, the equipment that way. But we're falling a little bit short was how to properly run our trucks and trailers. And so that's the one thing, like, training is very important. If we can train our employees properly how to do it, one, it's going to make sure that we don't have downtime, as we talked about earlier, at roadside. And if our employees are doing the job and reporting it to us, that's the other thing. We can get it fixed, because there's really nothing worse than all of a sudden, let's say you're driving along and you've been pulled into a safety blitz or initiative, your vehicle goes in, and all of a sudden we find out that our emergency brake isn't working. And I'm just picking that as an example. And as we know, that's very, very important. Well, that takes our truck right off the road. I now have to get a truck, or I've got to get a tow truck to come pick up my truck. And now it's a little embarrassing seeing my truck go down the road from a police blitz, on the back of a tow truck with my name, Scott's Landscaping. People are going to go, I don't know if I want to use Scott. And the last thing is that my customer's not going to be happy, because I know in this day and age with our margins, we don't have spare trucks to be, filling in the void, right? We've now got to get there. So it's a whole area of issues that it can morph into very quickly. So that's why it's important to make sure the employees are trained in doing a proper pre-trip. And one thing out there, we believed in pre-trips so much. We actually got working with a company that has done up an app that actually does the pre-trip for you. And so in the sense, it does it for you, it actually has schedule one right on it. You do it on your phone. And it's really interesting. The thing is, you go through and it takes care of all those form and matter issues that I was saying earlier. Like, I wouldn't be given now a daily vehicle inspection form that somebody's filled out in crayon. I've had these. I've had guys that go, well, I can't be bothered to tell the boss I don't have any pre-trip, so I'm just going to redo the date over and over. It shows me it's proper. The other thing that it does, which is really nice, is that it has on it, it's called the MTO/police button. So if you're stopped, let's say for an inspection, and the officer has to look at your daily vehicle inspection report, you say, I've got it right here on your phone. And I'll tell you right now, the officer's not going to grab your phone. We never wanted to take that, because things can happen. I could drop your phone or whatever, but it gives you the ability then to email that pre-trip to me. And all police cars in the GTA, they have computers now in their cars. I love it, because you know what? They would send that. I could walk back to my car and boom, it's right there. I've got everything there. And I know that everything's been done. But the other thing I also know is I know that the owner is aware. Because if I fill out this, especially on this app, if there's an issue, let's say I go, I've got a bald tire, and I put that in and I carry on, it comes up red. But not only does it come up red, it would come into your computer at the house or at the shop, Mike, who was ever in charge. It would say, Scott, truck number 1 has got a bald tire, can't go. So if you see me drive out the driveway, you can quickly call me back and go, hey, we've got issues. Come on back here. And we get it fixed before it goes. The other nice thing is you can put trailers on it. You can adapt it for as many different vehicles or different configurations that you want. But let's say I went to trailer one. I went, oh, trailer one's not any good because the safety chains are not proper. And I'm missing a couple of bearing caps. So I put that in. I take trailer 3 out, but you come in, you need a trailer. It won't let you take that trailer out because when you try and log in, it'll show that I have said the trailer is not proper. But the big thing is it allows the owner to now keep an eye on his equipment and to make sure that the guys are probably doing what they're supposed to do and deal with it accordingly. Like the one gentleman I talked about who had this guy who worked for him for years plowing snow, he would have known that he wasn't doing pre-trips because where do most people keep their daily vehicle inspection reports, Mike? The paper ones. They're kept in the truck, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? You're only obligated to keep one in the truck a day, and that's the one for that day. Oh. It's not like if somebody's required to take logs, we have to surrender all the log books. But the reason that the reports are all usually kept in the truck is because we buy them in a book form and we just fill out the book as it goes. But what happens with the book? People spill coffee on it. Whereas we had one client, he just had one truck. He left them all in there. He had 6 months worth of his books in there and the truck got fired. It's kind of like the dog ate my homework, but he lost all his daily vehicle inspection reports. So if he had have ever gotten audited by the MCO at that point, he would fail that part of it because he didn't have any of those to produce. Nice thing with this app is it comes right on your computer and it's easy to store. As I said, if any of your listeners are interested, I would recommend highly. I'll give them a little plug right now. It's actually called ReadyCheck, and it actually their website is www.readycheck.com, and ReadyCheck is ReadyCheck. And also, if we do have a free promo through our company with this company, and it's try 30. If you put that in, so that's TRI 30, you get a 30-day free trial, which gives you a chance to go through it. And you may go, this is the best thing since sliced bread, or you may say, no, I'd rather stick with paper. But it gives you a chance to use it and to get to know the staff at ReadyCheck. They're more than very helpful and accommodating. And this is just sort of one thing that kind of helps. It would help me as an owner. Because usually the owners that are starting to more get into issues is when you start getting anything past 2 trucks, good luck trying to keep up with it. And that's the issue. And even if you have a full-time safety and compliance person, they can't be out checking every truck every day. And this just kind of gives them that peace of mind. So, I think that is one thing is great, is training and something like that for the start of the season. And as I said, the other thing that we need to be aware of, are our drivers properly licensed for what they're carrying? And then part of this gets into training. And this is one reason we run this roadside awareness course. A lot of stuff in commercial motor vehicles has to do with weight. Does my truck weigh over 4,500, which is a magic number? And we knew so much that dealt with weight is that we actually went out ourselves and purchased weigh scales for our company. So we're the only company that actually has weigh scales. They're the same that we use when we're within the police department. And we can actually come and weigh up your vehicles. For instance, where we run into trouble is trailers. Trailers, probably you would be aware, it can be an issue in the company, right? And I'm going to pick sod because sod can be heavy, especially when it's wet. I've got sod on my trailer, you get stopped. And the first indicator to me as an officer, and even to this day, is I look at the tires. The tires tell me if the trailer's heavy and if the trailer's not happy, right? And we weigh up the trailer, and the trailer weighs in at 5,000 kilograms. So that's 5 tons. Well, guess what? We need to have a Class A license. So all of a sudden, I've got a Class G. That no longer is going to cut it. And even if I have a Class D, a lot of people don't realize they can't haul a trailer any more than a G licensed driver. So our trailers have to be under 4,600 kilograms. So this is why weight is such a key thing to know. And that's kind of why they've come out in the last 5 to 10 years with this new class of license with the A restricted. Are you familiar with that one, Mike?
Yeah, actually, that goes back to my Service Ontario inquiry is, do I need this or not? That's what I was asking them, and they just could not give me an answer about that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's when it starts coming with the class of license. And again, which is something that we teach, but that's also why we went and got weigh scales, because some companies have different configurations. So skid steers, as you're probably well aware, can be very heavy. And people say, well, I Googled it, and it says this is how much it weighed. But yes, we've got it. How much is the trailer weigh? Is it a heavy-duty trailer you've got it on? It doesn't tell you how much it has with fluid. So is it a full fuel tank, or because it can be a varying scale. So when we weigh equipment, we say fill it as full and let's know what the maximum weight is so we know what we're dealing with. And that's where we start going is the Class A license always speaks to your trailer. So the reason they came in with the restricted license is they realized, and especially the construction landscape industry are hauling heavier trailers, but you're not hauling air brake trailers. So they're going, we don't need to put them through this training, but on the other hand, we don't want to train Mike and have Mike do his training on an electric brake trailer, a hydraulic brake trailer, and then we see him going down the highway next week in a tractor trailer because he's gone and done his 3-day air brake course. Because the next thing we know that will happen is you'll be in the ditch and the 401 will be, clogged up more than normal. So that's what the testing you would be doing is to the vehicle that you're operating. And that's what you take in to do your road test, is that vehicle. But we've realized it's become such a big thing and again, tough to navigate. We've actually partnered with a gentleman who actually does teach how to prep for the AR test. So because that can be different too, what you need to prepare, right? And so what you're showing though, basically is you're showing with your Class A that you've got the competency to operate that truck and trailer for your company. And the R shows that you're no longer allowed, but you're not allowed to have an air brake trailer behind you. So we've seen some pretty interesting licenses. If you take a look also, Mike, I don't know if you're familiar, but on the back of your driver's license, it actually tells you your conditions. And this would be one thing I would say to your listeners. If you're not sure, pull your license out to the back and take a look. Very few people actually know that it tells you right on the back what your restrictions are. And the other thing is to know the actual weight of your trailer. You'll only ever know that if you actually weigh it. And that's something that we have to be prepared for. And the other thing is when we're talking about driver's licenses, that we have to say to the companies and the owners is you got to check and make sure they're valid licenses. They're not suspended. Again, like we talk about CVORs, there is an onus. When we're called into companies, we recommend you do it every 90 days. You're checking your driver's abstracts, or I should say to make sure they're still properly licensed because of the different vehicle impoundment programs that are out there. So one, if you happen to have a driver who's suspended for say too many demerit points or like a Highway Traffic Act offenses, you have with a commercial truck, you're lucky you have a little bit of a leeway that it allows you 100 days to make sure to find out if they're suspended before the police or MTO would seize your truck. But let's say that I'm driving your truck for you, Mike, and my license has been suspended for 110 days. You've never bothered to ask me about my license other than when you first hired me. And my license, I get stopped by the police. Scott, you've been suspended for 110 days. Yes. Well, they're taking your truck as well, Mike. They're impounding it for 7 days. So you would lose the use of that vehicle. So that's why, again, it's very important that as an operator, we're checking our driver's licenses on our drivers to make sure they're valid. And that's, again, that sort of paper keeping, timekeeping, so to speak, that we're doing that we're not keeping up on. And we could get a nasty surprise. The other reason, if we're doing the 90 days, if our driver, let's say, should have gotten caught for a criminal offense, such as dangerous driving or impaired driving, and not in company trucks in their own vehicles, they get suspended first provincially. So this would give you a chance to actually then find out, is the license suspended or not, so you can take the appropriate action. But again, when we do our training, we always say to the drivers, if you've got an issue, tell the operator now. Don't just be embarrassed because there's nothing worse than making that phone call. Oh, Mike, by the way, I've lost your truck for a week. So again, it's all that stuff that we want to do. But the other thing when we're looking, again, at getting going for the start, is our annuals. So again, I said annuals are good for a year. If I was an operator in the construction industry, I would try and make sure my trailers are getting done every March and April, probably March, because I know April we start to get busy. And the reason I always pick March is if I do it at the end of the year, if I do my annuals on my trailer and I'm great, I get them done, they're good for a year, I get them done in October, November, what happens to the winter? They're sitting. So all of a sudden, then I think my trailers are good to go. My guys aren't doing proper daily vehicle inspections. They get out on the road and we run into issues that maybe the brakes are no longer working. Maybe the breakaway switch is broken. So those become issues. So we want to make sure that, one, we've got the proper annuals, that they are annual safety if required. My suggestion is for my trucks and trailers, I would be trying to do them around March or at the start of the season as opposed to the end of the season. And the last thing is I would make sure in my vehicles, I would be providing a binder for every truck. So I would make sure in that binder, I've got the ownership for the truck. They can be photocopies, but we got to make sure it's the front and the back that's photocopied. I would be having a copy of all the trailers I have in that binder. I would be having a copy of my insurance, and I would be having a copy of my PMCVI or my annual safety sticker. So although we have the yellow sticker on the truck and the trailer, I would want to make sure that I have copies of those in the truck. And the reason being, Mike, is the stickers are issued from the government. So what does that mean about the quality of them? Yeah, it means it's very, very poor. They tend to rip. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, or tear, especially if you're working in the winter and you've got the ice scraper out and you're cleaning your windshields off. So a lot of people then go, well, can I take my truck on the road? Like, it requires this annual safety, but I've wrecked the sticker. It can't be read. And the answer is yes, you can. But we have to have that copy of that annual safety in the truck. So if you were stopped by the police, I can guarantee you that, especially if you're driving an F-550 dump truck, down the road, you're going to get stopped. The officer doesn't see an annual. And you say it's quite common. Hey, officer, you know what? I'm sorry. My scraping the truck off. I busted the sticker, but here you go. You've got a copy of it. And it tells right on there the date when it was done. So then you are allowed to be on the road. And then what you do is you need to go back to the garage that issued that sticker to you and get them to basically reissue a new sticker for the vehicle. Or the other thing is what happens with vehicles on the road. We get we get a rock in the windshield gets broken and it's taken out. Well, we just have to get a replacement sticker. So that's what we need to be aware that we have that there. Because the other thing I will always say is, we talked earlier about how do you feel when the police are stopping you? And you said, like, you get a little nervous. Well, you can imagine what your employees are getting like. And if you have this binder for them and they get stopped, I loved it. If I walked up to the vehicle and said, hi, and I tell you, the reason I stopped you today is I just want to make sure you did your daily vehicle inspection report and that you got all your paperwork with you. If I know something wrong, I'll let them know. If I could see that, please. And so if you show me a binder, I'm happy because I know everything's in there. And also, what's it telling me as an officer? It tells me that you're a great operator. You're providing this stuff. It's not like all of a sudden you open the glove box, the kid's shaking and you can't find the stuff. There's 7 insurance slips in there. They can't find the ownership. It just goes a long way with really first impressions of helping also the company out. So, and helping the employee out. So that's something that both Al and Pat and myself really strongly recommend, is that as an operator, you make sure that we, set our employees up for success. And that's one way of doing it right off the top. And just the other thing is just making sure that our employees are just aware that, they have to do the daily vehicle inspections. As I said, that I've gone on about this, but this is the one thing. And the other thing is, if the truck's broken, we get it towed back. A term I've always used through classes, this is not ice road truckers. I mean, I do not want to see you crimping brake lines and anything else like that. And again, I've seen on Facebook, I've just shaken my head with somebody saying, well, you got to get home. Well, you're on the 400 series highway. You know what? We have tow trucks. Maybe you might do that to get off the roadway, but once you're off the roadway, you're then getting a truck in there to tow you. And that's the big thing, because we're liable, right? If we should have something then happen that we go through and we run into someone because we've done that, we're looking at a criminal charge. And again, when we talk about daily vehicle inspections, now I'm going to be talking about like a truck that's obviously a little bigger than the ones that we're normally operating. But the one issue this gentleman owned he didn't own, but he was working for a company and he was hauling lumber. And it was a B train, and he was coming out of the north. He was coming from Sudbury. And he did 5 minutes. It took him 5 minutes to check a B train. So we're talking, roughly 10 axles, 12 axles? That's a big truck, right? That's 25 meters. There's no way he did it in 5 minutes. And he was going down the road, and unfortunately, traffic braked on him on the 400 highway, and he hit a van and knocked it into oncoming traffic and hit another vehicle head on. And there was a fatality as a result of it. So there was a trial, and that driver was convicted of criminal negligence causing death, because there's no way you did a proper vehicle inspection in 5 minutes. We have to be prepared for that we've done the proper time. And again, when they checked the braking on that truck, so he should have had 20 brakes on it. He had like 4 that were out of adjustment, and he had another 4 that weren't working. So right there, that's something that you would have caught before you ever left the yard. So that's what we have to be aware of. Once we know we've got an issue with the truck, the onus is then on us as the driver. And again, as you're the owner of the company, if I don't tell you, how can you fix it, right? Yeah. So as I said, so the main thing is this is just all stuff we want to do, and just make sure we have the proper, documents in the truck, and our employees are properly trained at the start of the season.
Definitely. Scott, did we cover circle checks? Do we want to get into what a proper circle check looks like at the beginning of a day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should do that. That was next on my list. So
perfect.
I didn't want to hog all the airtime, Mike. I want to let you.
Your voice sounds much better than mine, so take all the airtime that you want.
Well, okay. As they say, I've got a face for radio, right? Anyhow, so what we actually did, we did last year for Landscape Ontario, I actually wrote an article with the help of the editor, just how to do a proper daily vehicle inspection check. And so we're just going to go through that, and just so we understand, because again, this is a big part of it. And believe it or not, the way the police or the MTO will check your truck is the way you should be checking it yourself when you start the day. Again, if I'm looking at a pickup truck, probably going to take me 15 minutes, right? If I'm looking at a pickup truck and a trailer, probably about 20 to 30. The bigger the vehicle, the longer it's probably going to take me. And the one thing is, and so I make sure I do hit on it, if I'm operating in a closed trailer, so again, I'm going to get especially the people now that like to keep their equipment on the inside. I tend to find a lot of companies now put their like lawn equipment inside the trailers because, again, one, it's a little better security and so forth. That's part of your check is your load. Like just because it's not seen out of sight doesn't mean it's out of mind. We have to make sure that it's properly secured inside as well. But as we get going, so we are definitely required to do a pre-trip or a daily vehicle inspection report if our vehicle is registered for over 4,500 kilograms. I would even suggest as a company policy that any of my vehicles I ever owned, I would say my guys are doing it, because I want to have a record that, I get you trained on how to, let's say, just do it in our little panel van, like you normally drop off stuff at a job site, not heavy equipment, but, I move you up to one of the bigger trucks that you're doing it and you know how to do it properly. And I want to have those records there too down the road in case there ever was an issue. And it's a great way for it to help me keep up on my mechanical fitness of the vehicles. Are things being properly fixed? And the thing we have to remember, and we've touched on it, is that, we have to surrender that document, the daily vehicle inspection report, upon demand by the police MTO. And, whether it be in the paper form or whether it be in the app form, we have to do that. And we've talked about, we have to make sure we have Schedule 1. That's what we're using to check our vehicle, because that's going to tell us what is a major problem and a minor problem. As simple as a minor problem, my headlight's not working. So if it's daylight, as it is right now, as we're doing this at about 11 o'clock, I'm okay to go. It's a minor defect. I'm allowed to carry on the day. I have to let you know as the operator, and we have to have it fixed before the next day, but I could still use the truck that day. If it's 4 a.m, I do require 2 headlights. I can't take the truck out. It's a major defect. So we have to be aware of that type of stuff. And other stuff is brake lights or signal lights on my truck. I noticed my truck doesn't have signal lights and not working. That can happen, but I'm hooked with a trailer and the trailer has signal lights. Can I go on the road? Well, it tells you that in that case, although it's a minor defect, I still have to mark it down on like daily vehicle inspection. I'd be allowed to go on the road as long as I have that trailer behind me that has working signal lights. So we just need to be aware of, and that's why we need that piece of Schedule 1, which tells us what we need and what's required. Because again, we've talked about the Highway Traffic Act. How are you expected to know, this is my first day on the job or so forth. So the other thing is, if we are using paper, we got to make sure that the employees are actually filling out our daily vehicle inspection report. They're filling it out legibly that I can read it. And I don't want to make sure that they're using short forms, like they can't be prepared to put down the city they've done the check-in or the address. Usually what people put, we find is shop. Well, that doesn't really help me, because the reason why I'm looking at that is I'm also, when I was an officer, was trying to ascertain, do you require daily vehicle logs? So are you traveling greater than 160 kilometers as the crow flies? And this tells me, right? I look, there's a document. It tells me your address. This is where you started. It also tells me you're starting and stopping at the same address as well. So this is why it's very important. And for not filling that out, Mike, you might be surprised. It's a $390 fine for not properly filling one of those reports out, which is, again, why I brought up earlier about that ReadyCheck app, because that takes care of all of that for you. So the thing we need to do is we've talked about our major defects and minor defects. We need to know. The other thing we've also got to make sure is even if it's a minor defect, when it's fixed, we have to mark down on that daily vehicle inspection report who's fixed it. We have to keep track of that because yourself as the operator, you have to have that there because if you ever were audited by the MTO, you need those documents to be able to show that you're keeping up on your maintenance files. And we have to keep our pre-trips for 6 months, and we have to keep all vehicle mechanical records for up to 2 years. As we have the vehicle as it rolls along. So that stuff as an operator we'd have to be aware of. But as we get on to checking the vehicle and doing the daily vehicle inspection, the first thing to start is we just start checking the lighting on the vehicle. And so what we're doing is we're checking our headlights, we're checking our low and high beam, we're checking our left and right signal lights, and checking our brake lights. And we're doing a circle check because we're walking around. I was always big on walking around my vehicle more than once. The reason being, maybe you missed something the first time, right? And if it's dark out, you better use a flashlight when we're checking this stuff because some stuff's pretty easy to miss, as you can probably agree, at night or early in the morning. So after we've checked our headlights, next thing I want to check are my tires. So I want to ensure that they're not flat and that we've got proper air pressure. So the easiest way to check if your tire is flat, and especially obviously when we're working in the industry, we're normally wearing steel toe boots, give it a good kick. And have you ever had a flat tire, Mike? You ever kicked one?
Oh yeah.
And it's a thud, right? But know it's flat, right? And also, if you take a look down, it's really flat. You're just going to see it right on the ground. But we need to check and make sure employees are aware how to do that. The next thing we need to do is make sure that the lug nuts have not come loose. So when we talk about that, is like you've actually got to get down in there physically. And just about people I've talked to, and they're very honest, I've never done this. You put your hands on there and you actually start turning them counterclockwise. And, and I've had people say, well, Scott, like they're like a pickup trucks are 150, foot-pounds of torque. There's no way you're going to do it. Well, I hope not. I don't want to move it. But let me tell you, through my career, I was checked some, gravel trucks, and I was able to get them to turn to my hand. Like I was able to get like sometimes 3 or 4 in a row. And that's showing me that the person isn't checking. Because the big thing is with loose tires, I don't know if you've ever had one on your vehicle, but they start to tell you, you're doom, 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 doom. And so when we're looking at that, that's telling you you've got a problem. You better be stopping to check. And the easiest way also is if you have washers, if you start trying to spin those, they'll spin first sometimes before the lug nut comes loose. Then we just have to retighten them and get them done properly. We also want to make sure, though, while we're doing this, that the tires are not bald. And, we have wear bars. So, there are magic numbers that we look at. But, when we look at the numbers, you're not allowed to have anything less than 3 millimeters on your front tires. So on the steer axle tires, and less than 1.5 on the rest of your tires, they've got to be changed out. I would say before you ever get to 3 millimeters, you want to be changing those tires, right? Last thing is I want to blow out and my employees or someone else getting hurt. But the other thing is I want to make sure that my truck isn't taken off the road and it's safe to do so. The next thing you want to do is you want to be checking the sidewalls. Are there any cuts and are there any slices in them? And again, that's quite common, especially when you're in the the industry. That can happen, right? Because you're going, maybe you have to park up next to curbs. Maybe you have to jump the odd curb to get to your site. So we got to be aware of that. And then the other thing is to check the sidewalls for bulges. Have you ever had a bulge in any of your tires, Mike?
No, luckily not yet.
Okay, well, you're good. But what is that shows the tire's compromised. So you get a bulge and be on the inside or the outside, normally on the inside. And the reason it happens on the inside is because it just makes it more tough to find. But the thing is, I would find through my career, I would say, oh, driver, I've noticed that you've got a bulge in the outside of the tire. And you know what the driver would come out and do? 9 times out of 10, try and push it back in with their finger. Well, as soon as they do that, I'm running the other way because that tire is ready to explode. During my career, I've been around. It wasn't the vehicle I was looking at, but one of the other officers at one of these blitzes, and the tire just exploded. And it just sounded like a gunshot going off. Fortunately, no one was hurt. But what's happened is that tire can get compromised. Now, can you get a bulge in your tire in the afternoon? You didn't have them there when you did your daily vehicle inspection report? Absolutely. But that's why we're saying it's an ongoing process. You got to keep checking your vehicle. If you get a bulge in the tire, I would strongly recommend you actually get a tire company in and get someone that knows a little bit more how to properly change the tire for you, because, again, it can become dangerous. And the other thing is when you're checking your tires, and I cannot stress this enough, you need to wear gloves because when we start talking about the cord, that fine little particles, you start running your hands around the tire, it can cut your hand and ruin your day very quickly. I've seen people do it without gloves and have that happen, and you're kind of just sort of shaking your head, right? Especially after you've told them maybe you should be wearing gloves. So we need to be aware of that. And the next thing, we need to make sure that the vehicle has its wheel bearing caps and they're not missing, especially on our trailers. A lot of people think we can head out on the road, and we have to have those caps on for the reason being we don't want any dirt, grit, and grime getting into those wheel bearings and cause them to overheat and the grease to come out. So that's why it's very important we make sure we have those on. And the next thing we want to check is if we have a trailer, we want to make sure that our connection to the trailer is secure. So what I'm talking about there is I want to make sure that one is the tow bar properly secured, like, bolts aren't loose, that it happens. Am I using a proper, let's say, coupler? So in the sense of if I have a 2-inch ball in my trailer, is on my truck and the receiver, is that what the trailer uses? As an example, one of my colleagues from another department investigated an accident where a gentleman had a trailer that took a 2 5/8-inch ball, and he only had it. Well, he had the 2 on the truck, and he couldn't be bothered to change it. The other one was in the truck. I'm only going 2 miles down the road. Well, you guess what happened? He hit a bump. Trailer came off, and it actually hit a pedestrian who was walking on the sidewalk and caused very serious injuries. And all because they saved 30 seconds. So again, we've got to make sure that that's properly secure. And as I'm on the thing of securement, we want to make sure, and especially after we've been at a job site, you want to be checking that somebody hasn't come along and thought it'd be a joke and actually unhooked your trailer. As I said earlier in our talk, I was actually in the Marine unit for 16 years, and I checked religiously my boat trailer, and I actually found that somebody had undone it. The first time, Mike, I had actually just had your normal locking pin through that. She said, well, I'm going to get a little better. And I put a lock on it, and somebody actually cut it. And, what they're hoping, let's see the police officer put the boat in put the trailer in the water, hook up the boat and see it go floating down. And so, and I have had a couple of calls for different operators who said, you know what, Scott, my truck and trailer was parked here. It came out and it was unlocked. Now they just had that normal little locking pin in there. So we need to be aware of that. And also, you know what, if we don't have that locking pin in and we hit a bump, could it come loose? It could. So we need to be aware of all of that, make sure that's properly secured. And as I said, the other thing we want to make sure is that the tow bar is properly secured to the truck. During my career, I've seen a few trucks where the tow bar is pretty much rusted right out, or they've had it on the bumper and the bumper is just about done. We've got to make sure that the trailer is staying with the truck. And as we're doing that, and we talk about the thing of safety, what we want to make sure is also that our safety chains are connected. And we've got to make sure if our chains, when they have those, the little clips connected to them, those clips are in proper working order and are there. And so when we look at safety chains, the way the Act reads is that there can't be any damage to them. So if I owned a trailer, I would never lend it to anybody, because I don't know how many times I saw somebody borrowed a buddy's trailer going to the dump and the chains are just dragging like this, and they've damaged the chains just on the way there, which is why we talked about earlier that you are allowed to wind your chains. So that is a good thing to be aware of. But the problem is if our chains get any damage on them at all, they're no longer compliant. And the other thing is our trailer has to be equipped with a brake. Well, I should say equipped. A trailer, if it is equipped with a breakaway switch. So it doesn't have to have one. If it was not manufactured with one, we're okay. But if it was manufactured with a breakaway switch, it must be in proper working order. So what that means by that is that it has to be hooked to the frame of the truck. What a lot of operators were doing for a while is they were hooking into the safety chains. And they said, oh, well, I was told this by the salesman. So I actually called in this one company. That's what the salesman had been telling them. So we had to say that's wrong. The reason it can't be the safety chains is what happens if the safety chain breaks. That's your weak link. You've lost the breakaway. So that's why it has to be hooked to the truck itself. And that piece of wire that we have to make sure that it's not broken itself. You can't tape it up. You can't put in granny knots. It has to be one strand. So that's something we have to be aware of. So that's one thing. And that's if the trailer is equipped with that system. The other thing that we find is there's trailers out there. They're not as prevalent now, but they still are out there that have hydraulic braking. And what we have to make sure with those is that there's actually fluid in the reservoir. We've got brake fluid. We need to be checking that every day. So what the officer will do is if they stop you and you have a hydraulic brake vehicle, they're going to actually ask you. They're not going to. They're going to ask you to open the reservoir. And if you have no idea how to do it, what is that a good indication of?
You're not. You don't even know how to fill
You
it
don't
up.
know how to fill it up, and you haven't done it right. So you haven't even done a proper inspection. And usually, when you did get these things open, I mean, a lot of times they were very, very bone dry. They didn't have any fluid in them. And our trailer requires brakes after it weighs, so it has to actually weigh over 1,360 kilograms. So, if we got a machine on there, any type of a load, on a dual axle trailer, we're going to need to make sure that our braking system is working. But the next thing is I'm walking around that I'm doing while I'm still outside the truck and checking is I'm checking the load security as well. So I want to make sure is the load secured and make sure it's not going to move. So countrywide, what we actually use is we use what's called National Safety Code 10, which I would recommend to any of your operators and listeners, Mike, to actually download it. And it tells you each specific way that it has to be loaded, that, you have to have a certain weight. If your weight is over 500 kilograms, and you have to have so many straps. If your machine weighs over 4,500 kilograms, you have to have so many chains, and so forth in the way it has to be done. And it is right there. And if any of your listeners have any questions, they're more than welcome to email us, and I'll give you our email address at the end. And we'll be happy to sort of help you out, because again, we are out there to try and make sure we want people on the road that, if they want to know what they need to do, we'll make sure they're out there being safe. And the other thing is that if we're using tarping, and that's the other thing that we need to teach our employees to check. So today, and then I'm going again, I've been using as an example quite a bit, the F550 truck dumps that have the tarps on them. So what happens is I'm not using the tarp in the morning. That's great. I'm good to go. But I need to check that tarp, because if you all of a sudden say, Scott, I need you to go pick up a load of screenings, and I've now got to use the tarp and I've got rips and tears in it, I now no longer have a proper securement device for that. So I have to be checking that every morning as well, because how can you fix it, Mike, as an owner or an operator, if I, as your employee, am not telling you? Because especially as your business grows, you just can't physically be out there and check every truck. We have to trust our employees to be doing this and provide them with that hands-on training. So that's a big part of that as well. And I mean, when we start talking about, if we're looking at fines, just to throw it out there, Mike, your average fine for a highway traffic act offense when you're dealing with commercial motor vehicles is $390. And people wonder, well, who gets charged, the driver or the owner? Well, you can charge both. You can charge the driver or the owner. Most jurisdictions now are charging both. And the reason they're charging both, Mike, is we used to have, if the operator is just charged, as I said, sometimes it's tough for the operator. But the operator might come to court and say, well, this is the worst employee I've ever had. I've gotten rid of them. Well, the next week we see you still have that employee. And if you just charge an employee, they say, well, it's the operator's fault. And you might get the justice of the peace going, well, yeah, no, that's true. That's the other person's fault. And they might dismiss the charge depending on what it is. So now you'll see that both operator and owner will be, the owner and the operator and the driver will be charged. And it's at that point, come to court and tell us who's responsible. Like, we want you both to come to court. We're going to sit down in front of the justice of the peace and we'll figure out who's responsible. But as I said, it goes a long way that if you've been given any notice for any citations, for any violations that you may have had happen, show that you fixed them. And I mean, we've talked about this before. If I got caught or if I was stopped and was found my emergency brake was defective, I'm going to have that repair notice that I got the emergency brake fixed. Here you go. It says right here that I was fixed at Scott Service Center. I'm also then going to go, you know what, I've done training. Like, you come and show me, well, I've done now training with my guys, and here's a manual. Or we've even had some companies actually use us, and then we issue certificates. They use those, say, hey, we've taught our employees what they're supposed to do. That goes a long way with sort of saying, you know what, you're a company that's trying to do the right thing now, and it'll work more to your benefit, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm good. So the next thing we just talked about is we talked about emergency brakes. We're going to talk right now about how to properly test your emergency brake. And this again is with hydraulic brake vehicles. And I think that's primarily what we're going to focus on. The first thing is we want to make sure that we're on a level surface would be the best for obvious reasons. And we need to activate that emergency brake. So the first thing is you've got to know how to put the brake on. And as I get there, you sort of think that seems kind of like obvious, but through my 33-year career, if I asked me to activate the emergency brake, you'd be amazed how many people couldn't do it. Because one, we had the old standard where you just push straight down, you're good to go. But then you have those other ones now that have that, You push down, but you can't push twice or it comes back up. It takes it off. And now there's electric brakes on the truck in the sense of an electric emergency brake. So remind me, Mike, if I forget to talk about the electric emergency brake, I will explain how to deal with that as well. Because that's just more or less new on the market, I think, since 2016. That's kind of coming more into play. But with your standard emergency brake, we have to put the brake on. Always a good indication to me if the brake wasn't working, if the driver couldn't put it on, if they're just sitting there and pushing with all their might and it doesn't move, it's probably seized. But we need to make sure the brake's on and as far to the floor as we can get it. Next thing we do then is we put the vehicle in drive and we take our foot off the gas, or not off the gas, but off the brake. If the truck moves forward, we've got issues. So we're going to stop, put the truck back in the park, release the brake and put it on again because maybe we haven't gotten it all the way down to activate it and go through that procedure again. We'll then put it into drive and take the foot off the brake. And if the truck doesn't move, that's great. One, that's saying that we're in good shape. And then we're going to do the same with reverse. Then we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to then give it a little bit of throttle. And the reason we're doing this is we want to make sure that it's not something on the road that's actually holding the truck in place. So for instance, do I have a heavier load in the trailer, or am I in a lot that's got gravel and I've just got a little bit of a pothole I didn't see, or just something I didn't see that might be enough to stop the truck? So when I mean light throttle, I mean light throttle. So most trucks are normally resting at about 600 RPM. And that's what we're going to use the RPM needle to gauge this. The emergency brake is on. Our truck is in drive. We're going to take our foot now, put it on the gas, and very lightly and slowly, just give it a little bit of gas. Watch that RPM needle creep up to about 800 RPM. So we're not giving it very much. Just want to hear the engine engage. And if the truck doesn't move, we're good. If it does move, then again, we're just going to retest the brake once more, the way we talked about, and do it again. And if the truck moves, then our emergency brake is not working. And we have to let then the operator know, and the truck can't go on the road. It's a major defect and it has to be fixed. I've heard a lot of myths out there during my career. I've had people call her alleged mechanic, probably was their buddy, and said, oh, it's a diesel, it'll never hold. Well, the truck I operated when I was working was an F5 Ford F550. And then I would say, well, look at this. And I would put my emergency brake on, and we would never do this to let's say a client's vehicle, but I would rev it up to 1500 RPM and that truck would hold solid. And so that's the whole thing, right? We're only asking just for a little bit. And the reason we're doing that, and the reason I want to do this as an operator, I just want to make sure my truck doesn't get out there. And it was just the terrain my truck was in that made it stop at the time when my driver tested it. But if you do that every day you test or every day that vehicle goes on the road, that emergency brake will work. You can count that it'll work if you go into a safety blitz. You won't be nervous about it because now you know what's going to work. You know how to test it, how it works. And the last thing is, and again, goes back to my career, I had one gentleman who said, well, that emergency brake's useless. I never use it. My hydraulic brakes are fine. But when I tested the hydraulic brakes, which is something as simple as having him just put his foot on the pedal, he popped the line. So he would have needed that emergency brake, which didn't work. So that's why we're doing it, is we're required to have two safety braking systems. And just the last thing now with the new emergency brakes, the electric ones, when I ask you to do that little bit of a test where you put it into drive, it actually deactivates the brake. So you're going to go, my emergency brake isn't working at all. So all you do is you actually just hold the button out, and that's how you do that. So that's the only difference on that part of it. But as I said, the one thing is that you tended to find the older, especially braking systems in the sense of the emergency brakes, a little more prone to seize. I mean, and also if your brake isn't working and you stopped and you were that individual that took it on the road and the test is going on, you might be wise just to admit to the officer that it's not working. I had one gentleman come up to me and I could see the brake was rusted right out. I asked him to put it on, put it to the floor, and I'm walking beside him down the parking lot and he goes, I don't know what's going on, officer. It was working last week. That brake cable hadn't been there for about 3 years. So again, just, that goes in the back of my mind if I decide, am I going to lay charges as an officer, right? And the next thing Mike will talk about is just the braking systems on our trailers. Again, and this is sometimes where we're not talking well enough for people maybe are not aware enough of their equipment. And again, when do I need braking on my trailer is when it actually weighs. So it has to be weighed and it has to weigh over 1,360 kilograms. So what we do there is there's two types of braking systems on our trailers that we're going to be dealing with in our industry primarily, unless we're a Class A or AZ license holder. And that's the electric braking system we talked about, or hydraulics. So what we're going to do there with our electric braking system, we have to have a controller in the truck. So a lot of trucks now, when you buy them, that's an option to come with. What I used to find with some of the other trucks that operators were buying a little bit bare bones, it didn't come with it. You had to get an aftermarket brake controller in it. And some people were getting confused with the little trailer insignia, on the transmissions for when you're going up hills. And some of the older trucks that you could push down, they thought that was a brake controller. That's not. That's just to help the truck's transmission when you're going up hills or you got a heavy load. So you have to make sure that you've got that controller, and you need to know how it works. So, some people aren't aware, Mike, that actually each brake controller has a manual override system when we're using it. So our recommendations are, when we're testing it, we want to make sure we're going to pass. So we would have you set the gain to your trailer to 10. And that button's right on there. You would never run your trailer at 10 because it would be causing you a lot of issues going down the road, but we know it's going to activate the brakes. So what we do is, again, we're on a level surface. We have you, again, make sure your emergency brakes off in the truck at this point. We put the truck into drive and just take your foot off the gas, and the truck will just start to roll ahead very slowly. And you got to let it roll ahead just a little bit, because you have to make sure, and then you activate the brake controller. And at that point, if the trailer stops the truck, you've got trailer brakes and you're good to go. Just make sure that, again, then you reset the gain down to what the appropriate gain would be for the equipment or load that you're hauling. But that way we can be prepared and we realize that we're good to go. But we also do have to check at times. Like if, let's say, it doesn't work the first time, I would be going back to my trailer because of those connections we've talked about on the electric brakes. And we want to make sure it's properly connected and something hasn't happened there, or that we've got an issue. And the last thing is that when we're checking our surge brakes, I don't know if you ever operated a trailer with surge brakes, but they are a bit of a nuisance to drive or back up. I mean, that's how you can quickly tell, but we want to make sure that we've got the fluid in the reservoir and that we're actually opening it up, because it'll become very evident if you are stopped, we talked about earlier, to make sure that it's, what you're doing and it's been inspected properly. And then the next thing is we need to actually check what's called steering wheel free play. So Mike, have you ever had the pleasure of going through a safety blitz?
I have not, no, in my 4 years of business.
Okay, so this is a way, if you've ever been through one, a lot of your listeners probably have had the pleasure of going through. You'll notice that the officers are up and down, they're under the truck, they're checking stuff, they're checking your drag links, your pitman arms, your output shaft, steering motor. I've just named off a lot of components already, haven't I? And you're going, how am I supposed to check that? I do hardscaping. I'm not a mechanic. So the easiest way to actually check this is called checking your steering wheel free play. And it takes all of about 20 seconds. So what you do with your steering wheel, you want to make sure your wheels are straight. And what you do is you take the steering wheel, and I always pick the turn indicator as sort of my point that I'm going to use as my reference point. So I put my hand on it, and I turn the wheel down to left till I slightly notice the wheels just start to turn. And what I do is I move my hand up to mark that, and then I move it to the right. And when it starts to turn, I put my other hand there and I basically take a look, or you can mark it with a chalk pen. But what I have to then know is what is the distance of, what is the diameter of my steering wheel. Now, if we're dealing with, we're dealing with, 3/4 tons, 1 ton trucks, it's going to be about 15 inches. So 15 inches, I'm allowed up to 3 inches of what's called free play. So if I've got less than 3 inches of free play, that's telling me that all the components are good on the truck down below. And my truck's not, going from side to side. I'm good to be on the road. If I'm over 3 inches, so let's say I go, holy cow, it's 4 or 5, I can't take the truck on the road. Now, as basically at that point, as a employee, I don't know what the issue is down below, but I know that there's something going on and it needs to be fixed. And I mean, especially when we look at trucks that are plowing snow, I mean, their front ends, because they do take a bit of a pounding, they're the ones that tend to have a bit more free play. And the worst that I have ever seen was 8 inches. And basically it's going from side to side. But some officers that even had it even worse than ones they've been checking. And I mean, and this should be stuff that we should be catching before that truck ever hits the road. But that's how we do it. And again, each diameter is a little different. We have to know our diameters. So the one thing people can do is, again, it's right in the regulations. We can check the regulations because it's going to tell us under regulation 611. Again, if you're curious, I mean, that's something that down the road, like we could provide as well, because we have charts and so forth that are printed out to tell us what you're allowed. And that's just what we have to be aware of what the truck has. But again, it's all safety that we're looking for and needing to be keeping up on. And other areas that we need to inspect while we're working, also got to make sure our seatbelt's in proper working conditions and that the seatbelt isn't fraying or torn, like the days of running like that are done. We have to have a proper seat in the truck. And you may be looking at me like, Scott, what are you talking about? Well, I mean, I've had colleagues that have found trucks that have lawn chairs put in them, right? And that's for the driver. So we have to be aware of that. Other things like, are our dangerous goods that are in the truck, are they properly secured? And I'm now talking about batteries. I mean, I had an issue where a truck was brought in. I asked the driver to start the truck for me. Well, the battery was shot. So he got out, had a booster pack with twine inside the engine of the truck, and that's what he was using to start the truck. Plus, he's banging on the starter, like real old school. So if our truck gets to that state, we need to be getting fixed, right? The next thing we want to make sure is that we've got proper brake fluid and we've got windshield washer fluid in the vehicle. We need to make sure that the horn works. And these are all quick things to do. And then just the other thing is we need to check under the vehicle to make sure that we have no loose parts. And you're going to look, but I had one truck stopped at once and the caliper had actually come off. It was just hanging there. And really, if the driver, all he had to do was just get under on their knees, you would have just seen it hanging down. And the other thing that we're also checking for at this point is we're also checking for our springs, make sure our springs are properly, we've got all our springs, they're not cracked or they're not separated. And if they're cracked or separated, they got to be fixed by the appropriate person. And we can't take the truck. And I think that's the other thing. When we have a major defect, the truck has to be towed. We cannot drive it to the mechanic. And we have to realize that. Because once we've deemed it's not good enough to work, it's not good enough to be on the road. And we can't be doing repairs ourselves that are haphazard. I mean, I've stopped trucks, especially with spring packs. I had one where the person used hose clamps to try and hold them together. I had one guy where he tied it with rope. I had another guy using duct tape. I've seen it all. So we've got to have proper repairs. And I mean, we've got to make sure that everything's safe to be on the road. And next thing we talk about is just tires. And again, I just want to really get on about tires. Is if once we know that tires and an operator or owner should have a system in place. If the tires have come off that truck, you want to make sure that they're going back for a recheck or a retorque within 100 kilometers. We don't want a wheel coming off because in garages do this for free, the recheck and retorque, or you can get your own torque wrench as well. But I mean, I had a case with this and I investigated Milton, where this gentleman was operating a cube van for his company, and it's, it was registered for 10,000 kilograms. So he was operating some weight, and he lost the left side of his dual axle, and the wheels went down the road. Fortunately, they didn't hit anybody. As I'm walking up to the truck, I was a trained investigator, Mike. I noticed he had new brakes on it. So I said, well, you just got some new brake work. I guess you had the wheels off probably, 2 weeks ago? And he goes, yes. How'd you know? I said, well, just, kind of that's what I'm thinking. I said, you start getting a noise or vibration maybe about a week ago? He goes, absolutely. It was going just back forth. I said, so what did you do? He said, well, I just turned the radio up higher. So that was his way of dealing with an issue. As I said earlier during our interview, the trucks are telling us when they're not happy, especially tires. We have to be aware and attentive, like that truck was telling us. Because you could be looking for wheel off if somebody's injured. You could be looking up to a $50,000 fine, both as a driver and operator. So that's what we have to remember. And that's why when we're doing our classes, we have to be aware that we're responsible for bringing it on the road. And, whether it's that we've sent an employee off to a job site to get a load of fill, and the operator's a little over exuberant who's filling his truck and he overfills it, we have to teach our employees that they know that truck is at its maximum or it's not rated for that. So again, we have to be aware of that. And that's part of the daily vehicle inspection when we're dealing with it, that everyone has to make sure that, it's a team effort, that the truck is good to go. And again, and the other things that we just talked about when we're talking about pre-trips, right? We want to make sure the paperwork's in the truck and it's current and up to date. That gets easier if we're doing training, right? If we know the binders are done once a year, because part of training, you have the employees pull out the binders and put all the new stuff in that you've got. It's there. And we got to make sure the gross vehicle what the vehicle is registered for is proper. And the reason I bring this up, we talked earlier about Service Ontario. We have to watch, because if you've walked in and you just, I've got an F-250 pickup, I just want to register, and you leave it at that, they'll default you down to 3,000 kilograms, because that's what they do. You have to tell them how much you want it registered for. Unless you get someone that goes F-250, that's a 3/4 ton. Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. So we need to be aware and look, because can one or two slip by, if you've got a fleet of 10 trucks? Absolutely, one can. So we just need to be aware of that. And again, and I did talk earlier about the trailers. Like if we're hauling trailers, we have to know how much weight we have in them. And this is all part of looking at our daily vehicle inspections, because with a G licensed driver, I could haul that trailer for you to the job site if it's empty, but I might not be able to haul it back when it's full. And the other thing that we're just required to do is that we just have to make sure that while we're doing our inspections, that the annual safeties have been done on the trailers ourselves. And that's why we need to teach the employees how to read them. Because again, the bigger we get, something can get lost in the shuffle. And we just need to be aware of all of that. So I think the last thing we need to talk about that I just didn't talk about, but any of your listeners that would be operating an air brake vehicle, we didn't talk about just checking the brake adjustments. And again, this sort of throws people have been driving for years don't quite realize they're actually required to be getting under the truck to check the brake stroke. And in order to do this, you have to release the brakes. Obviously, you need to have wheel chocks because you want to have it properly chalked. And you want your pressure built up to 100 pounds per square inch. And what you do is when you release the brakes, you have to go under and you got to mark them, each push rod. And then what you do is you got to have somebody normally with you would be much better, but then you have to have somebody activate the brakes so you can get under and measure them. And then you have to know what the chamber size. So for instance, if you had what's called a C30, a regular stroke brake, anything over 2 inches becomes what's called a defect. And I have to know, what, adjustment size, can I have it on the road or not? So obviously once I have a brake out of adjustment, it can't be on the road, but that's quite a more onerous task, right? That's why these drivers with the air brake endorsement have to go through that much more training, but that's what they have to be doing. So, and that's just for any of your, clients or listeners that would have a vehicle under the, that would require air brake vehicles. And it tells you how to do it actually under the Ontario Regulation 587, just to ensure the brakes are in alignment. So that's just what we need to be prepared and realize.
Gotcha. Scott, this was so much great information. I don't even have any follow-up questions because of how detailed you're getting here. One thing with ReadyCheck, does that nullify the need to have a Schedule 1 copy in the truck? Or is that included in the app and that's good?
It's included in the app and that's fine. But what ReadyCheck also gives out is, because you might run into an issue one day, let's say your phone's not working or something happens, they actually also, part of their kit is they send out a copy of Schedule 1. So you have it in the truck anyhow. And they also send out a couple of daily vehicle inspection, like paper forms. So you do have those. And that's just in case for some reason, let's say the cellular network went down, it could happen that you'd be good to go. But no, ReadyCheck itself, Schedule 1's right on it. So it's right on the app, and that's what you're checking into.
And then are we ever going to come across an officer that will not accept an electronic copy? I know as a CVOR holder myself, I got an email recently saying that things are moving towards electronic inspections anyways. That's never going to be an issue, is it?
It's not going to be an issue. And if it became an issue, Mike, the issue would be the officer's not, hasn't been educated, I guess, for lack of a better word. One of our clients was using ReadyCheck and had gotten stopped, and the one officer said that it didn't comply. So we politely sent him an email and said, you need to look at this. This is where it falls under. And they actually got back and thanked us for it. So it was actually, though, an officer not from a GTA service, it was from another service that didn't deal with it as much. And if you're ever to receive, as they said, a citation for it, I mean, that's just something that we would be more than happy to go to court with you and help you realize that, that could be dealt with. And sometimes just a quick call to the prosecutor to go, our client got a ticket for this, and or you do it yourself. And this is where it says it in the act, and this is what we have. So, no, it wouldn't be an issue, but I guess what I'm saying is it wouldn't be an offense. Could an officer not be informed? Yes. But I mean, that's changing quite as things are evolving.
coming to a close here. You've listed some resources. Let's talk about. I'm just gonna say this really quickly. Readycheck.ca. That's READYCHEK.ca. Use the promo code TRI30. That'll get you 30 days free to check out that if you want to move towards a more electronic set of daily inspections. Have that Schedule 1 with you. Tablets are inexpensive these days. Having one in each truck to do those checks, that's a great way to go about that. Scott, any accessible information on the topics that we've covered throughout this interview? Any more tools available to us that we haven't quite discussed yet that you can send people to? Anything else that you want to talk about when it comes to that?
Sure, absolutely. And just to get back to ReadyCheck, Mike, it's actually readycheck.com. That's what they're at. So READYCHEK.com. That's there, but everything else is correct. So yeah, so other resources that you have out there. Again, we'll say it again. We start off not Facebook. Don't use Facebook because you don't know the background of the person that's giving you the information. So if we're looking for load security, you can look at National Safety Code 10. And then when we get under the Highway Traffic Act, all of our stuff for commercial vehicles is in the regulation. So if you looked at Ontario Regulation 199, that deals with commercial motor vehicle inspections and schedules. Regulation 587 deals with your equipment. Regulation 611 deals with safety inspections. And then Regulation 413 deals with weights and dimensions. Other things we should be aware of is we should be aware of for transport. When I say dangerous goods, I'm even talking like the jerry cans of gas, especially for the people for our equipment. We should be aware of the Dangerous Goods and Transportation Act because that's what that falls under. But the big part that we sometimes fall short on is the load security of the jerry cans that we have. So, we're allowed to carry limited quantities, but it tells us how it has to be secured and it also tells us how the cans need to be properly closed and proper cans as well, right? Other things I would recommend, the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, their website, so CVSA, it's down for that. And also Landscape Ontario. I mean, one thing that when I started in commercial motor vehicles, we developed a really good relationship with Landscape Ontario. And there's a lot of good information through their symposiums and information such as you and I discussed earlier, the Congress is coming up, I believe, January 11th to the 13th in Toronto. And we believe so much in that and the safety. We're going to be there. We're going to be right by the safety drive event and booth 129 if anybody wants to pop by. And also, training is very key. Feel free to contact us. So if everybody wants to get a hold of us, we have our website, which is www.tri-shield.ca is our website. Or you can contact us at info@tri-shield.ca. That's our main email address. So again, if I happen to be away, one of my other two colleagues would be able to get back to you with any questions, whether it's training and so forth. And then there's just a lot of stuff that we've put together that we've realized for training courses, Mike, that, people are aware of. And one of the big ones that we've actually starting to find that people have been asking for operators is we do a CVOR exploratory review. And what that is like, we come in and we take a look and we actually put the company, we sit down with the company and see, are you meeting all the requirements? So you may be satisfactory, unaudited it's called, but that's maybe because you haven't been stopped. And we don't want you to ever get stopped. So it sort of allows us to come in and sit down with you and go, maybe we're falling a little bit short on these areas, or you're doing great. But it's a great measuring stick for the company to know where they're at. And we actually do, like we talked about, with vehicle weights are very important. That's something that we offer. And more than happy to come and weigh your vehicles. And I think the other thing that we realized, and we've talked to a few people, like, you get the person has the one truck going, well, I don't really want to pay for you to come and do this. So we say, well, get 2 or 3 contractors with you and we can do all 3 at once, right? And you guys can split the bill. Or something else I think we have to be aware of when we start looking at it, we talked about monetary fines are very expensive and for commercial motor vehicles. So sometimes it's probably cheaper to have somebody come out and help you as opposed to than having to go to court and pay. And then sometimes I've seen people pay up to $1,500 in fines, if not more, because they just, one, at that time, couldn't get the information or didn't want to seek it out. And as I said, otherwise, I mean, we offer like courses to employees about what to expect to roadside awareness. That one that we talked about, it was very brief. We talked about the daily vehicle inspection report. That's a 3-hour course that we offered to companies, employees, just on itself, like how to make sure you've properly done it. And, you know, there's a lot of sort of the tricks of what officers are looking for and what you need to be looking for. But again, like I said, Mike, I appreciate you having me on today. And any questions, please feel free to contact us, and we'd be more than happy to help out. And other than that, thanks very much for having me on.
Scott, I just want to say it's evident that you are a big proponent on safety and for everything that you've done throughout your career. It's big for, and me just speaking to the audience, big for our safety, but also for the safeties of everyone around us. Road safety is super important. If you're putting it aside, if you're just starting your business, it's an easy thing to kind of put on the back burner and say, I'll do this later, which is the wrong thing that we need to be doing. We need to be kind of partnering with law enforcement and to make the roads a safer place for everybody. Scott, thank you so much for this wide-ranging conversation. The time that you've put into this really helps not only myself, but I speak for, I'm sure, my audience, that they got a lot out of this for sure. I've got all the resources that we've talked about there on my tab here. It's going to be in the show notes if you are listening to this and you want to have all those links available to you. That includes Tri-Shield Consulting, ReadyCheck, and all the different regulations. Everything that we've kind of talked about will be in the show notes there. Scott, thank you so much for your time here.
Thanks again, Mike. Take care.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. Again, check out the show notes for all the links discussed at the end of this episode here and throughout. Once again, check out Scott and the Tri-Shield Consulting team at Landscape Ontario, booth 129. And we'd love it if you subscribe to the podcast, left us a rating and review. Check out our website for more information on all of this, howtohardscape.com. And we look forward to meeting with you next week on the How to Hardscape podcast.